child has a common orthopedic condition, that doesn't mean you can only get common treatments. You can choose Shriners Hospitals for Children. Our world-class care is not limited to insurance networks or to what's been done before. The same doctors who innovate treatments for the most complicated orthopedic issues will help your child grow and develop properly. And we'll give your child a whole lot more than medical treatment. Shriners Hospitals for Children, the most amazing care anywhere.
But that being said, on the real side, I think there's a fair consensus that the real impact in terms of direct government spending is quite low. But like I reiterated earlier, I think we have to look at this as a wait and watch approach. The government possibly is not letting go of all its monetary and fiscal stimulus ammunition in one go, because obviously nobody knows how the emergency is going to look like over the next couple of months. The government could be reserving some of these measures for later on.
Hello.
To be fair to Narendra Modi, trying to be a leader
Hello.
to 1.35 billion people is fraught.
Hello.
You can't be everything to anyone just by sheer numbers. But there does seem to be a disconnect between the base, which he has obviously looked after, and then the weaker parts of society which haven't felt it. Has that been a political and an economic mistake?
Yes, so I do think that we are seeing a deficiency when it comes to the demand side, in the sense that perhaps we should be seeing it, what you see in other countries, be it cash transfers to the poor or wage subsidies to corporates to sort of tide over now. But again, there are other important things to consider in the sense that India's fiscal health, especially in times of a rating downgrade, so we're in a bit of a precarious condition. But you could see some of these measures being unrolled over the next couple of months. What we've seen so far is to sort of just keep business running and to tide over.
Neha, as we speak, the lockdowns are being eased. We've seen pictures of shopping malls reopening and the like. I mean, have you got a sense of maybe how damaging this period has been and how India will and can recover from it?
So that's right, the lockdown is being eased, and I think our numbers from January to March of 2020, which are out right now, give you a good picture of what can be expected. So January to March of 2020, the Indian economy grew at a quarterly rate of 3.1%, which was a 44-year low. And in that January to March period, it essentially captured just 1 week of the effective lockdown, because of a lot of it was in April and May. So looking forward, this quarter, of course, is going to be a lot weaker. And net for the fiscal year that we're in right now, that's 2020-21, we're expecting a contraction of 4.8%. And I believe it's important to note this is not purely because of the lockdown itself. Of course, a huge part of it is the lockdown itself. But as the economy starts to recover, it's of course going to take a lot of time for businesses to get back to normal, for consumer sentiment to sort of be revived, for that confidence element to be restored. And a lot of industries are going to take longer to recover than the others. And quickly answering your point on what is important to restore near-term growth, I believe that the restoration of this confidence factor amongst consumers is very important for that demand side revival. And this is, of course, tied to the containment of the virus itself to a large extent. And on the other side, it's important for the government to sort of put out consistent and reiterate their messaging on precautionary measures, social distancing, and equally important for private firms and outlets to follow the same. So when you as a consumer step out, you're confident about what you're getting into,
What
so
you're walking into,
demand.
yeah.
Exactly.
Neha Thomas, it's been great talking to you. Thank you for joining us this week.
Thank you so much.
We're staying in Asia now, but heading further east to Hong Kong, which has long held the crown as the biggest financial centre in the region. Behind New York and London, it is ranked third in the world at $4.9 trillion. But what happens when all that gets undermined by what is ultimately Hong Kong's controlling power? China's decision to stamp out ongoing democracy protests with a national security bill has been controversial, And while Hong Kong's benchmark index lost 7% last month, there's no evidence that international investors have rushed for the exit. What there is evidence of, however, is China flooding the market with capital to at least give the impression of business as usual. Meanwhile, the United States has threatened to sanction Chinese officials who are closely tied to the security clampdown, a decision mocked by Chinese officials in light of the protests over the police killing of a black man in the US. So what does the future hold for Hong Kong's status as a financial centre? Let's ask our regular contributor Ruben Mondejar in Hong Kong. He is a professor for Asian Initiatives at the University of Navarra's IESE Business School. Always good to see you, Ruben. Hong Kong has always been prized for its independence, for its high international standards. With all these changes coming in from Beijing, surely that is under threat now.
Well, we have to first to see what really the law is going to say. So far, that law has not yet been enacted, and therefore the reaction, whether it's from the international community or from Hong Kong itself, we'll have to wait for that law to come out, and then we'll see how both Trump will respond to it with all his threats that if this law comes into effect on Hong Kong, we will withdraw the independence from Hong Kong as a special autonomous region of China. So we call it Hong Kong SAR, Special Administrative Region, so he wants to revoke that. But again, that depends on what really China means by this National Security Act that it is going to impose on Hong Kong.
Okay.
So it's a bit premature to make now quite kind of clear outcomes of what will be the effect. But however, people are prepared. The business community has made statements. Our tycoons and billionaires have made statements in general supporting the proposed law because it will give them stability. And then also they really have no choice.
Well, let's look at some of the anecdotal evidence, though. You've got two UK banks, HSBC and Standard Chartered, who are both backing Beijing's position. But then you also have reports of some hedge funds which may be considering moving out. What more do you hear about, I guess, if some companies, if some banks are getting a bit spooked by it all?
The bottom line is that China wants Hong Kong as it is because the biggest beneficiary of Hong Kong is really China. Since the handover, Hong Kong has become the play center of Chinese hot money. So China prefers that they have a Hong Kong in which all the money players in China that could not do it in China because it's not good for the domestic economy can do it in Hong Kong. Imagine, it's like Macau. If gambling is illegal in any part of China, then they allow Macau to be the center of gambling. So it's the same thing in Hong Kong. They want Hong Kong to be as it is because there is no replacement. Shanghai cannot be a replacement.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you.
Cannot be a financial center.
Has China taken any steps to make mainland China look more attractive for international banks and international investors?
Remember that a few days ago they announced that Hainan, one of the special economic zones, one of the 5 special economic zones, they will turn into another Hong Kong. That's not going to happen, at least not in the foreseeable future, not in my lifetime, and probably not in the next 50 years. For us, any place in China that's under the control of the central government cannot be like Hong Kong, because Hong Kong was inherited with all its characteristics, the characteristics that made it international, the only really international city within Chinese territory.
Just finally, Ruben, you touched on this earlier, talking about how President Trump will react. We always look to that. Just give me your views briefly on how damaging potentially the US and its decision to change its status or the way it views Hong Kong, how potentially damaging that could be.
Well, there are 4 areas we're talking about here. Whatever Trump does, it will fall within these 4 areas. One is tariffs. One is the use of dollars as the currency for transactions and trade. Third is the restrictions on the soft power, access to technology, science, education, all of that. And the fourth is sanctions on China officials. For example, restrictions on travel, visas, on identified people, specific personalities that Trump will will say have been responsible for this. So all of those like visas, freezing their accounts in the US, all of those. That's the fourth. So that will be the effect. Tariffs, I think, will be difficult because if Trump really considers Hong Kong no more autonomous in terms of trade, then the whole tariff system that has been imposed on China on phase one of the trade war will apply to Hong Kong. So I don't think that's going to happen because that's also detrimental to the US in some sense because Hong Kong really we don't produce our own. We are a re-exporting country. So sorry, not country. Economy. So there. But I think it will begin with the soft power. For example, sanctions on China and Hong Kong officials. So restrictions on access to sensitive technology, scientific research, education, all. So it will go up the ladder. First on the sanctions on officials, then secondly sanctions on the soft power issues, education restrictions and then third will be the restriction on the dollar. That is serious because SWIFT and CHIPS, which are the kind of the way in which we deal with Hong Kong, with the US dollar. After all, China's foreign reserves, 45% of that is denominated in US dollars. So therefore, China in fact protects that. China limits the flow of US dollars outside of Chinese territory. Yeah. So then the last one will be tariffs. I think tariffs is the last one. So this will be the four. Trump will begin with the soft power, really cosmetic type of effect to embarrass China. The whole thing of this is just Trump believes that he's the only one who can really confront China and call the bluff of China.
Okay,
so
Ruben,
this is, I think, the main goal there.
Thank you for all your time and your thoughts there. Ruben Mondesha joining us from Hong Kong. Well, we've already talked about jobs this week in relation to India, but the fact is hundreds of millions of jobs have been lost worldwide because of this coronavirus pandemic, while those who can, and that includes, I should say, the producers and editors of this show, have been working from home using online technology to keep us all connected. But believe it or not, there's been jobs creation too. The virtual economy continues to grow. It employs hundreds of thousands of people. It is worth $100 billion a year, which actually makes it bigger than the global film industry. Just one example for you. Farmers, not the ones who deal with crops and cattle, but rather they're a term given to people who sell in-game items to other online players. There are more than 150,000 people worldwide earning up to $25,000 a year doing that. It's been popular in Venezuela, where these so-called farmers can earn $40 a month, remembering the country is rife with unemployment and the average wage is only $7.50 a month. L'Atelier is a foresight company. It's part of BNP Paribas, and John Egan is the CEO, joining us from Paris this week. John, thanks for your time. So, modder, shoutcaster, skin designer. I had to do some research because I had no idea what these things meant. A shoutcaster apparently is a commentator on esports and things like that. I mean, I'm sorry to be boring here, but are these real jobs? Are these sustainable jobs?
Well, two different questions come on. So are they real jobs? Yes, certainly. And there's quite a few people employed in them right now. Are they sustainable? Time will tell. I think what we're seeing, though, is that there's hundreds of thousands of people now deriving an income from virtual economies. And while some of them might disappear, certainly some of them will be maintained.
Could they become an aspirational job, even? I'm just thinking back to when we've seen previous quote-unquote .com bubbles and they burst. Now, I don't think we're in that territory now. I think quote-unquote .com is just part of life. So is it different now? Can these become jobs which people actually work towards?
Well, some of them already are. And use examples, for instance, people will be familiar with Second Life, has for years sustained businesses within the platform, so much so that $65 million in income was actually withdrawn from Second Life last year to businesses that exist on the platform. That's just one example. Now, there are a lot of them that are transient, I accept, but some of those jobs that are aspirational already are jobs like streamers and esports. They're already mainstream. But I think one of the things we looked at were the emerging jobs, the jobs that are only at the beginning and maybe sometimes are more supplemental in their income profile than they are primary.
Like what?
Like, for instance, virtual asset creators and virtual good creators. So we are seeing an increase in the emergence of decentralized cityscape platforms. Examples would be Decentraland and CryptoVoxels and Simonium Space. And on these platforms, people are creating virtual artifacts secured by a technology called non-fungible tokens. And these NFTs, non-fungible tokens, not only do they provide provenance to the actual virtual asset itself or the good, but they also establish uniqueness. And in creating uniqueness, it establishes value. And around that value, we've seen the emergence of secondary markets that will support a qualification of value for those virtual goods. So one instance, or one example, would be the emergence of people who are creating virtual goods, virtual art, and virtual assets.
Okay. Let's talk about existing jobs then, because what the pandemic has showed, and it was through necessity, is that working from home is doable. And it was actually pretty quick, I thought, the way people switched to it, and the technology was clearly there to be able to make it happen. Does that mean it should carry once, and I hate this phrase, once all this is over, because who knows when it will be over?
Yes, that's a part of it. The intrinsic nature of this question is complicated because we're not really sure what the new normal will be and when it would arrive. But I would expect that we will see a degradation in the level of involvement within virtual platforms in this enormous spike over the last couple of months, primarily and principally due to the pandemic. But you would expect, or certainly we would expect, that once life returns to normal, there will be a significant portion of people that maintain their immersions within these virtual worlds, within these virtual platforms on a more permanent basis. Our expectation is that we'll see stock prices and gaming stocks decrease. We'll expect to see levels of download for digital gaming decrease, but the behavior is now established. It's 3-4 months of that behavior, and we've also seen a significant amount of job loss. So people are looking for new ways to create income on virtual platforms.
On that issue of job loss, it has been horrendous all over the world. What are your thoughts on recovery? Because I guess so much will be dependent on how many people are able to be rehired by a company. Maybe companies are just saying to them now, look, we have to let you go because we're going to go under if we don't, but rehiring will be key.
Rehiring is a complicated thing. You know, historically, we see the highest rate of a decrease to unemployment peak at about 0.7% a year. So if you see a drop of 7% unemployment, you will or 7% unemployment, you will typically expect to wait a decade before that's reestablished. So whilst that is somewhat different now because of furloughing and the temporary transient nature of some of the job losses, I would expect that we are likely to be dealing with the consequences of some of the job losses now globally for at least the next decade.
New normal, isn't it? John Egan joining us from Paris. Thank you so much. Do appreciate it.
Thank you, Kamal.
And that is where we'll leave things this week, but I do want to hear from you, your thoughts on this week's show or for future episodes. I'm at Kamal AJE. Tweet or DM me, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. You can go old school if you want. Drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is the address. And there's more online at aljazeera.com/CTC. Takes you straight to our homepage in the shows section. There you can watch individual reports and entire episodes anytime you want. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next. Rewind.
I can't bring your people back to life. I'm sorry.
Updates on the best of Al Jazeera's documentaries.
The struggle continues, but from back then till now, I've covered a huge distance.
Rewind continues with Baltimore, Anatomy of an American City.
I had close friends who were lost to the streets. I could literally see the future of Baltimore through the eyes of my students, and it does not look good.
Rewind on Al Jazeera.
The Brazilian journalist investigating a politically sanctioned land grab.
All the farmers helped get Bolsonaro elected, and he's repaid them.
That's empowering everyday people to profit from the destruction of the rainforest.
People are almost willing to give their life away to guarantee the occupation of the land.
Is journalism the last hope in the fight to save the Amazon?
This is not only a land conflict, but a conflict of narrative.
Brazil, the age of Bolsonaro. Whose truth is it anyway on Al Jazeera?
Be the hero the world needs right now. Wash your hands.
parts of Europe slowly begin to reopen borders and economies as lockdown restrictions are lifted further. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobby. You're watching Al Jazeera live from our headquarters here in Doha. Also coming up,
no one walking this green earth expects to be shot and killed like trash in the street for falling asleep in a drive-thru.
a family mourns while a city protests. The latest police shooting of a black man in the US city of Atlanta, a homicide investigation, is now underway.